Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, Jello enthusiasts, avid readers. I still don't have anything. Um, this is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo. We are doing Jello Reads. This is episode 4. This is Cruising Part 4. Not really sure how many more there's going to be. I think there's going to be, including this one, 4 more. We'll see. Let's get into it. So first up, we have chapter 10, John Lynch. And this chapter is, aside from the prose, what's going on in his head, this is very similar to the scene in the movie where he arrives at the apartment. So he wakes up, he's been living there, I think, for like a day or so, or a couple days. He's waking up to the sound of a typewriter. He's really annoyed because he's been out all these nights, only had like 4 or 5 hours of sleep. He's just upset that, that's as much as he can sleep. Other people are starting their days, so he might as well too. First thing is he's like starts complaining about like how he's having to drink all these gay drinks, all these daiquiris, when he wants to just be pounding back some like rye or like just a strong beer. And there there's this part where he gets up, the shades are drawn, and he's thinking about opening the blinds, opening the shades, but he's not really decent, so he doesn't want to expose himself to the neighbors outside or anything, or the people on the street. And he's like looking at himself in the mirror, and he's always having these like conversations, or he's reliving these conversations he's had with Edelson or so, and like he's remembering these things that Edelson told him, like, make sure you do this, oh, doing this couldn't hurt, blah blah blah. And he's just like, why me? So what that like the victims all looked like me? Like where you like, is that supposed to mean that I look gay? And so he's like, if one of those fairies that was killed, if he was to be right next to me also naked, would you be able to tell which one is the gay one? And then he starts like looking at himself and being like, do I look gay? And then he's like spreads his butt cheeks and he's like looking at his asshole. And it's just funny because at first it describes it as like a little black hole, and then it says like, oh no, it's actually pink. And he goes, wow, I'm like 23 years of age, or 20, she's 23 or 25, but however many years of being alive, I've never seen my asshole. And he's just like, I don't get it. Like, why would anybody be attracted to this? And then he's thinking about like the guys he's been seeing out on the streets, and they seem to have like, packages. And he's just like, my God, like, what if you were to go with one of those guys? They would tear you apart, like literally. Fun stuff. He finally gets the ball rolling. I mean, he's going through all the things. He takes a shower, and then he's going through more things that Edelson said, and he's wondering about like he has a gun in his underpants or sock drawer, and he's remarking about how he always felt uncomfortable wearing it, and now that he's not able to wear it when he goes out, now he really understands that thing about what officers say when they feel naked without it. And he recalls this time that he was asking his Uncle Phil if he could touch his gun, and then it came into him telling him a story about when he had to use it. And I couldn't recall if John was there when this happened, or if he's just hearing about it. But It was like Uncle Phil was on his beat in this one area, and there was just a lot of trouble. Like I guess he was also kind of one of those cops that gave people problems or so. But he was telling him that like when you have a gun, it really is an equalizer. Like uh, the terrible thing is a bully who has a gun, and he's mentioning that like if one person has a knife and they get into an altercation, they'll use it. If two people have a knife and they get into an altercation, nothing will happen. So he's telling the story. These two black guys were walking by. I don't remember how it set off, but he had to he discharged his weapon, and John is finding this very like heroic and, oh, did you hear what Uncle Phil? And then it's like, but apparently this was actually kind of an issue and was going to lead to him actually having like a meeting with the department. All kind of not super important, but the whole talk about knife makes him think, well, wait, can I carry a knife? Technically, Edelson didn't say I couldn't carry a knife. And so he's thinking, maybe I should buy a knife. And he decides, anyways, to like wake up. He finds a bunch of porno mags, just like in the movie, and he's like, that's right, I gotta throw these out. This is from the previous tenant. He goes to throw them out, and as he's walking out the door, that his one of his neighbors says hello. Now in the movie, this is Teddy. In the book, his name is Dave Hopper, and they're back and forth, line for line, what is in the movie. Essentially, there might be a few lines omitted, but the whole talk about like, oh, so you're in the new tenant. Oh, I forgot what they call the landlady, but like, oh, she doesn't want us like want those thrown in with the trash. She'd rather have us stack them because she hasn't figured out, she can sell them. She hasn't figured out how to make money off of selling our trash yet. All those lines from that you see in the movie. John Lynch introduces himself as John Forbes, which is the alias he goes by in the movie. In the book, it makes sense. It's like Edelson told us to keep our first name, so it was one less thing to remember, and then just make up a last name. Pretty cool. We find out that the previous tenant's name was Bobby, and he was kind of a little crazy one. They asked, he's like, you want to go get something to eat? You want to go down to like, I forget what they calls it, like the freak show or something? Take a walk down, and it is this little diner, just kind of like the one in the movie, but scuzzier. There's like the people that it describes, like there's like a taxi driver who's like taking up 3 bar stools. There's a lot of like drugged out looking like women, a few gay people, but the food is good. The food is good. He learns that Dave is a writer, and Dave has the line that he's like, I write plays, kind of the Philip Berry-ish type. I don't remember if that's who he says in the movie. It might be a different person, but like I said, like the lines with Dave are the most verbatim of things that you then find in the movie. Like almost anything he says is what his character, or anything his character says in the movie is probably taken directly from the book. He's talking about, he's a writer, he's struggling. He's been pounding away at the typewriter all morning, but just nothing's coming. Also, he's described as being fairly different looking. He's young, in his mid-20s. He has curly brown, like dark hair, and he's like a little pudgy, not like super skinny like in the movie, but just a little round. Explains that his roommate, oh, what was his name? I didn't write it down, but I think it's the same as in the movie. Actually, maybe he didn't even say his name, but he's usually the one working, helping to pay the bills. He's a dancer, just like in the movie, and he's kind of going around trying to get this show that he's working on. They're trying to get it picked up by theaters, so he's going around doing that. As they're talking, the killer comes up, and John really needs to go to the bathroom, but he decides, oh, I should probably actually like just hear what he knows. Essentially what he finds out is they know of like 2 killings, the recent ones, the one that happened like the other night and then last Friday. And I think they know of maybe one more, but they don't know the full, they don't know everything. Word is getting around. We get the line where, I have to keep checking Dave because I keep wanting to say Teddy. He is saying that like, yeah, this happened and like kind of has kept me inside because I was, the night that we found out, me and my roommate found out, I was going around trying to cruise, and it really like scared me. And he was like, it's probably for the best because, like, honestly, I just, the whole act of cruising just terrifies me. Like, you never know if you're going to run into like an undercover vice cop who's going to beat you, or someone who wants to roll you, or you're going to, best case scenario, you're ending up in the bushes with someone with bad breath. Yeah. So he's just like, it's probably for the best that I'm abstaining from it. And John is like, well, I mean, you could probably go out. I mean, the cops will probably catch him. And then we get the line that is also in the movie where he's like, "Oh, if the police caught him, they'd probably make him a member of the Vice Squad." And this is when John learns that, oh, wow, okay, so everybody doesn't like somebody. The gays don't seem to like cops. And he goes, "Well, fair enough. We don't really like them, but everybody is kind of like doesn't like every group doesn't like some other group." And then he goes off to the bathroom, and there's this gay guy in the bathroom who's just brushing his hair, and it reeks in there. And he's trying to go to the bathroom, but the stall is like right next to the sink. And so he's basically pulls it out and he's trying to pee and he can't. And after a while, he just is like, oh my God, he just gives up. And there's a funny bit where he's like, I dialed the wrong number, trying to be like, and the guy, and the gay guy is like, well, sometimes it's good to just bring it out to air it. Well, call back. And John leaves. He goes and he sits down again. And then the guy comes out and he kind of is just like, that guy. And Dave essentially is like, oh, I hate that guy. He gives gays a bad name. And then John says something like, "Oh yeah, he'd fuck anything warm," and then Dave goes, "Yeah, lukewarm." And so they're kind of bonding over not liking this other guy, and so that's one of the first times that John is like, "Oh, this gay guy ain't so bad." And it's funny because the whole time, he's everything is just homophobic, like literally phobic, like homophobic, like not just like, oh, I hate these gays, but he's just like when he was in there peeing, he's afraid that the guy saying next to him was going to grab his dick. And he's always just kind of like, who's going to like try and touch me, who's going to try and who's going to do this. And he's finally, with the final pages in here, he's realizing, okay, like this guy's not so bad. Maybe you should judge people on an individual basis. And they decide, I want to make sure I'm not leaving anything out, but essentially they decide to like leave. They decide to get the check and just continue their day. And John has the thought like, oh, I should get a knife, but I'll take care of that on Monday. And that's pretty much that chapter. I can't recall if there's really anything else, but I think that's it for chapter 10. So on to the next chapter. Okay, chapter 11, Edelson's Notebook. It's more interesting, but it's a lot of the same, where he's like, okay, the decoys have been out for a week, and they're getting used to it. Like, they're actually kind of starting to report back and tell me what their findings are. And of course, he only names Lynch. He's like, even Lynch is starting to, to get his shit together a little bit. Like, he was fighting me so hard, but now he's finally like actually doing stuff, not just reporting what he sees at a distance. Again, like, okay, you're only pointing him out, but sure. Isn't there someone who's like really making you proud? He's going through like why is the killer doing this? Like, so like, okay, so you only kill homos. Like, why is that? Did something happen? Did you have a gay episode? Did like, do you just hate gay people? Or he's like, well, that can't be it, because you're going after a certain type. And he's like, okay, so what's that type all about? Like, is it a certain person that did you wrong? Did this person, like, why didn't you just kill them? Did they die and so you couldn't mete out the vengeance or whatever it is, your fury that you wanted to? Did they move and now they're too far away and they're out of reach? What is it? And he kind of is throwing everything out there except for the kind of the obvious, or at least archetypically what this is. And then he gets to it, like, is this all self-hatred? Like, is this you? Is this da 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 da? And then there's a odd bit where he's like, he, he says like gay people shouldn't be blaming straight people for their problems, which, you know, they should be, you know, like they cause enough of their own problems. And but the way he says it is like, oddly enough, is almost like he's convinced himself that that's not like, not to keep saying homophobic, but like the way he says it, the way how he formulates the thought, it's not coming from like the same place that John Lynch or Stuart Richards, where they come from when they're saying these types of things. He's almost saying it like he's thinks of himself like a psychologist. Like, that's not the way to, like, you know, straight people aren't your problem. Where it's like, dude, in this decade and in the previous decade, yeah, like, but whatever. So he seems kind of like he's got his head up his ass in terms of like, are you really like, don't think that, like, you know, the majority of society is not causing some problems? Anyways, Edelson gets to a point where he's then like, what is that? What is this? Like, what is a compulsion? Like, is it like someone who can't stop washing their hands, someone who can't stop eating, someone who can't stop sucking? And then he catches himself finally, and he's like, what is that? Is that just like my heterosexual smugness, just like labeling everything else as a compulsion? He's like, what is that self-hate? And then he's kind of starts looking inwards and being like, am I guilty of self-hate? Am I just, you know, projecting all this onto other people? And he's like, well, it's been 2 days without a killing. Okay, so that's something. And then he starts questioning the whole concept, or the concept, the idea of self-hate. And maybe he's got something he needs to work on. Next chapter. Okay, and then we have chapter 12, Stuart Richards. I think this is the longest chapter up to this point. Again, it's kind of hard to go by how many pages it is because Kindle just says how many minutes are left, which it says 30 minutes. So I'm assuming this is the longest chapter up to this point. I don't think it's the longest, but whatever, let's get to it. So Stuart Richards wakes up in bed, seems to imply that he's with someone. There's this mention of like cold sweat. Oh, he's always having, and he keeps referring to it as Mr. Fear. And he then describes the person he's in bed with. Her name is Anne Woodward. She's Japanese and claims that she's a student, but he considers her more like a hustler the way that they meet. I didn't really understand why, but that's that. And he then talks about this other girl he was with the day before, whose name is Ellen Phelps, and they'd already had sex twice. And then, like, you know, they're in bed together and she's kind of asleep, and he starts rubbing her and she's like, and kind of like rolls over and like spreads her legs, and he just climbs on top and goes for a third round. And they met in class, so it's someone that he actually knew at school. The last girl I think he met like at a bar or something. Then he talks about this other girl, Wilma, who he describes her as being a big girl, big ass. Everything about her is just big, like personality, and she's got a really obnoxious laugh. And he comments how she would like laugh in bed, and he was really off put by it. And the next girl he talks about is Renee, who he describes as being older, in her 50s, the only older girl that he's ever been with. And she was a widow. He met her at the library, I believe at the school. And they kind of like, they just hit it off, and like an hour later, they were having sex. And the way he describes her is that she's very almost clingy. Like like, when will I see you again, you know? And she's very much the pursuer in the relationship, and so he really quickly kind of has enough of her, and he's like, makes a rule like, no more older women, no more. He then kind of applies the rule to some of the other girls. Like, anyways, he's just like, no more older women, she's just too much trouble for me. And also he has to try to not think about his mother when he's with her. And then we get to this girl, the fifth girl. Her name was Barnard Barbara. I had no idea Barnard, Barnard. I've never heard that as a woman's name. Who knew? But at least he calls her Barbara a lot, but he calls her Barnard Barbara. He describes her as being flat chested, big talker. So always wants to talk about, they're in bed and that she wants to talk about his thoughts on imperialism and like racial inequality and like women's rights. Or it's basically like, okay, so she's very much like a university student and wants to try and talk to him about that. And he's just last thing he wants is to be talking, at least talking to someone he's just trying to have sex with. And she's always kind of complaining about things, like he's always talking about Terry with her and how Terry would let me do this. And he wants to, he kind of has this thing with a lot of the girls that he wants them to either go down on him, or he wants to bugger them, if you know what I mean. And some of the girls are like down for it. Like I think what was her name? Renee, the older woman, was down for it. All the other women usually have a problem with it. Like Wilma, the bigger girl, and he makes a remark like, for a girl who has such a big ass, you'd think she'd invite it. Ellen, the girl I'd mentioned earlier, who he met in class, she also had issue with it. And then Barbara also has issue with it, and she's like, why do you want to do that? Do you think I look like a boy? And then this brings up a whole thing with him wondering, like, why do I want to, like, why does my penis want to do this? Is it, and he's talking to his penis at one point, and he's just like, what do you want? You want a guy? You want to be inside a guy? You want a guy to be sucking on you? And he apparently had tested this theory. He said a few times he was by himself, working himself up. He would try and think of guys to see if it would do anything for him, and it didn't. And he's recently, this guy, he's been having so much sex that he started noticing that he has blood in his semen, which he mentions that the only time that ever happened was the first time he started playing with himself when he was, a teenager, and he had like whacked off like 40, or not 40, 4 times within 20 minutes. And then he was like, oh, let me give a break before I keep going. But yeah, so that's where he's at. He mentions having sort of a gay experience when he was 14. He had went to see Strangers on a Train, and this older guy sat next to him in the movie theater, and there was like plenty of seats, could have sat anywhere, sat next to him. And the guy eventually kind of like, first he was like spreading his legs and like, had his knee against Stewart's leg, and then all of a sudden he put his hand on Stewart's lap, and Stewart immediately got out of there. Was like, nope, I'm not comfortable with this. And he mentions that, like, there's a lot of gay guys around, and he'd always kind of considered the idea, but like never knew how he would be in the situation. And so he's always kind of like quick to assume he would be like like a aggressive or defensive, just like, get away from me, like, like, I can handle this. But yeah, this took him for a loop this time. When he was younger, he kind of felt uncomfortable, felt scared. And then he talks about his first person he killed, who was a teacher, who was an assistant professor of English literature named Howard Peartree, who all the kids called Partridge Pear Tree. And he was like one of those younger professors who kind of like immediately gets into that as his job, as his gig, and fairly openly gay. I mean, again, this is the guy he had described earlier in the book as just being kind of like limp wrist, and just like the way he talks is just very, very flamboyant, like that, like when he'd be making his point during lectures. And he'd had a class with him, and then he met him around like the day after Thanksgiving. He says it wasn't on Thanksgiving, it was the day after Thanksgiving. Met him, we'd both seen, we were coming out of the theater having just recently seen Laura, and what's his name, Howard Peartree starts hitting it off with him like, oh, you like the movie? And he's like, yeah, I've seen it like 5 times. And he goes, oh, me too. And they kind of go out for like a drink. And Howard is he's not like super forward, but he's kind of like he's trying to say, things like, oh, we're very similar. And those types of things aren't like advances, but he's clearly testing the waters. And he doesn't really go into specifics about what happened. He just kind of says that's how it started. But he does mention that he's on edge. He's the Mr. Fear thing has been ever since he'd read in the newspapers about there being 2 killings and the police have found a connection. So they believe they're all, they're linked. And he remarks that for the longest time this was just a private thing, like this was between him and his victims, and now it's becoming more of a common knowledge thing in the city. So he's really worried that he might get caught. So he has decided to stop killing for the time being. He put his knife in a suitcase and he's just been like having a lot of sex. He needs to be doing something to kind of feed into that, and I guess that's what it is. And earlier he remarks, when he's describing the women, he remarks that he's like which women he's gonna kind of keep in his regular rotation and which ones he's gonna like put in like a secondary harem. Apparently he's got like a lot of women that he's just like cycling through, which is like, wow, okay, to be 20 again, right? He's avoiding the Columbia neighborhood of his school. He doesn't want to be going around there feeling the urge to stalk someone and then bring the investigation closer to, narrowing it down that the killer must be, either a student or someone affiliated with Columbia University. He says, okay, so he gets back to talking about sex, and he says in so many words essentially that he enjoys when he's hooking up with someone and he has them do something that they don't want to do. Like, he doesn't like it if they flat out tell him no. He just likes it when they do a thing for him that they clearly are like uncomfortable with. So Ellen, or one of the girls, like, he kind of had to like, oh, Ellen he also describes as, I think I missed this, Barbara had the best face, even though she was flat chested. Ellen was like, he describes her as being like attractive at best. Like, he said she had a great body, but she was decent looking. And he describes her as coming from money. And I think she had lost her virginity to somebody in Ohio. And she said, like, yeah, I wasn't sure if he didn't really want to go again. So I wasn't sure if he was trying to figure out whether he liked girls or not. And so Stewart is kind of like teaching her the ropes of sex, so to speak, and he kind of has to like coax her into 69ing. And it's mentioning that he like, busts in her mouth, and she like had to like rush to like, get a bunch of tissue and brush her teeth for 5 minutes, and she just really didn't like it. And he promises her that he'll not do that, or he'll at least warn her. And then he talks about like how several times he would just pretend he forgot and do it again and just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. So he really gets a thrill out of just like, yeah, I don't know if you want to call that demeaning, but just like putting girls through the ringer in terms of having them do things that they do not want to do. And again, I don't know if I'm what I can say with it. YouTube's not going to come after me, but or because I upload these through YouTube. But buggery is the word that they do use a lot. And so he's always trying to go back in the back door. Terry would let him, but most of the other girls are just like really aren't comfortable with it. They either feel like it's going to hurt, or they just are off put by it in general. So the end of it, I think I can then get to this. The end of the chapter is essentially he's going to pick up Ellen again, because he's got to have his rotating harem. She's babysitting, and he's kind of like, yeah, just quit. You don't need you even said you don't need the money. Just come on out. And she's like, no, I'm doing it for Professor so and so and his wife, and I really like them. And like, oh, come on, I drove here, just come on. She's like, well, go, pick me up on the subway. Like, I don't need to, And so he's then goes back. He's waiting for her at the subway, and he gets hit on. And keep in mind, he doesn't have his knife on him, which usually he's got big balls when this happens. He's just because he's the hunter. So this guy, I think he describes him as being like black and Irish looking. I don't know. It's really odd how he describes this person. He also says he kind of looks like he was someone like in drag for Some Like It Hot. I'm not familiar with the reference, pardon me. But the he's smoking, and the guy is like kind of eyeing him up, and takes him like a solid minute or so before he finally speaks up, and he's just like, "Hey, can I bum a cigarette off you? I'll take off, you know, like I just want a cigarette." And so he gives him the cigarette, and the guy starts smoking it, and he doesn't leave. And then he's kind of like, you know, if you want, I can take off. And it's like clearly he doesn't want to leave, or he wants to gauge if Stuart wants to, you know, if he's interested. And he essentially tells him to fuck off. He essentially is just like, I don't remember what he says. I'm so sorry. But he essentially just tells him, like, you can get lost. And the guy is kind of taken aback. Didn't expect someone to be so rude. Like what he says is just really rude. And so the guy flicks the cigarette at him and walks off, and kind of walks off like this. And then I think he whatever. But Stewart is saying that, yeah, he didn't have his knife on him. Like he was like rubbing his pocket for where his knife would be, and he doesn't have it. And so he really feels uncomfortable. Like, fuck, I actually felt like I was in danger. I actually felt like I was the hunted in that situation. And then he sees Ellen, picks her up. She's down to, you know, and so they do. And he basically is describing how he's just going to like go hard, and, and he's curious if he's going to find blood again, because he's just like, I'm going to take it out. He has a thing he said like a few pages earlier about like, he liked doing these things because his screwing partners didn't. So that's the line there. And then the next paragraph is, there was also a kick that came from, he had an expression for this: spuming the cunt, not sperming it, putting down what a woman thought of as the best she had to offer. Back in his pre-Oklahoma days, he particularly liked doing this to some bitch who thought she was so much more mature than him because she had her own apartment and he was still living at home like a mama's boy. And even now, if he was with a girl who would go down on him, but who complained that she was just built too small for anal intercourse, every now and then he'd take too full a backstroke and slip out, and then slam back into what she quickly reminded him was the wrong place. Of course, every time he slipped one past them, he'd plead innocence. An accident, he'd say. Oh, he'd lose some, but there was plenty of other stuff around. That's our guy. That's the killer. So yeah, it kind of says a lot. And in that chapter, you do get the sense, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, that how much of this does he like? God, does he just need to have sex with a guy and just let go of all whatever this? Because you don't really, versus John Lynch, whose backstory, you kind of are getting at least a little like hints of why he is so homophobic. Stuart Richards, there's not really a reason for it yet, if you do get it. And I'm people just aren't hateful. Like either someone taught it to them or they learned it somehow, something. So for Stuart Richards, there doesn't seem to be the provocation. We don't seem to have the reason why he is homophobic, but it seems like if he wasn't, he would just be bisexual, like or maybe he'd be gay. Like, so we're at least getting bits of it, but it's still unexplained for the time being. But that's what was that, chapter 12? That's it for this segment of Giallo Reads. We'll be back next time with chapters 13, 14, and 15, I believe. Yes. All right. Thank you very much for watching. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo. And if nothing else, I'll see you next time.